What happens when the woman who raised a child with nothing but love and sacrifice gets erased from his life the moment he finds success? In this powerful emotional story, Julia Evans, a janitor who raised her adopted son Lucas from infancy, is cast aside when Lucas invites his wealthy birth mother to his wedding and tells everyone Julia is just the janitor. But Julia doesn't break, she rises. Armed with decades of truth, love, and quiet dignity, Julia crashes his wedding with undeniable proof of everything she gave up and everything he threw away. In front of a stunned crowd, she reveals the cost of real motherhood and exposes a devastating betrayal. Watch this unforgettable tale of maternal sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption as Julia takes back her voice and begins a new chapter of healing, self-love, and freedom. Like, comment, and subscribe if this story moved you, and don't forget to share it with someone who believes in real love and dignity. I never imagined that dedicating my entire life to someone else's happiness could lead to the greatest betrayal I'd ever known. My name is Julia Evans, and I'm 60 years old now. But to understand my story, you have to know me back when I was 30, living alone in a tiny weathered apartment above a bakery in a quiet Massachusetts town. Life hadn't exactly handed me a winning ticket, but I'd learned early on to take pride in making the best of whatever came my way. Back then, I worked as a janitor at Lincoln Elementary School, quietly cleaning hallways, scrubbing floors, and dusting shelves long after the children went home. I didn't mind it. There's dignity in every honest job. And even if my hands became rough and cracked from constant scrubbing, each paycheck represented my independence. I had dreams, once big, vibrant dreams of becoming a painter, but life doesn't always let you choose your canvas. It was a frigid January evening when everything changed. I was finishing up my shift, the icy wind whipping sharply against the windows, when I heard a faint cry echo from outside. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, but then it came again, softer but unmistakably real. My heart quickened as I stepped outside, and that's when I found him, a tiny bundle wrapped hastily in an old, worn blanket nestled against the bitter, cold concrete steps. I bent down slowly, my breath fogging in the air, and gently lifted the edge of the blanket to find a small, shivering baby boy staring back at me with eyes wide open, filled with silent pleading. In that instant, a deep, overwhelming wave of compassion surged through me. I could have called the authorities, but something inside refused to let go. Maybe it was loneliness, or perhaps it was fate, but I wrapped him close against my chest, feeling his tiny heartbeat press softly against mine, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." I named him Lucas. Overnight, my quiet, predictable life transformed completely. Suddenly, there were bottles and diapers, endless doctor visits, and sleepless nights spent rocking him back to sleep. My meager salary barely stretched far enough, but each time Lucas curled his tiny fingers around mine or smiled sleepily in my arms, the exhaustion seemed worthwhile. The early years blurred by, each day filled with silent determination to provide Lucas with the childhood he deserved, even if it meant double shifts and skipping meals myself. Despite the challenges, I cherished those moments, teaching him to ride his first bike in the school parking lot, cheering as he scored his first goal on the soccer field, and proudly pinning his artwork on our fridge door. In his laughter, I found my purpose. In his success, I saw a reflection of my sacrifice. I'd promised myself that he'd never feel unwanted or abandoned like I had in my youth. As Lucas grew older, the burden became heavier, yet my resolve only strengthened. I worked harder, took extra shifts, scrubbing hallways until late at night, quietly setting aside money for his future. First, it was college tuition, then his first car, and finally, the down payment for his own house. My pride swelled with each milestone he reached, every step closer to the kind of life I'd always wished for him. Now, at 60, as I stood quietly arranging the flowers in the tiny kitchen of my modest home, the soft fragrance of roses blending with the scent of freshly baked bread from downstairs, I felt a sense of peaceful satisfaction. Lucas was getting married soon, and although life had been relentless, every tired muscle and every aching bone seemed justified. But life, I would soon realize, has a peculiar way of teaching its harshest lessons when you least expect them. It was a chilly afternoon just weeks before his wedding when I stopped by Lucas's house unexpectedly, carrying a carefully wrapped gift in my hands, a handmade quilt that I had spent months preparing. The front door was slightly ajar, and just as I lifted my hand to knock, I heard his voice from inside, clear and unmistakable. "Come on, it's embarrassing," Lucas scoffed. "I can't have the janitor at my wedding. What would everyone think? She's just someone who cleans floors, for God's sake." I froze on the doorstep, my pulse hammering in my ears. The quilt slipped from my trembling fingers and landed soundlessly at my feet. Each word he spoke tore at something deep inside me, unraveling 30 years of sacrifice in seconds. My son, my Lucas, reduced me to nothing more than a shameful inconvenience. "Besides," Lucas continued casually, unaware of my presence, "I've already invited my real mom. She's more acceptable, you know?" I stepped back silently, my vision blurring from tears that refused to fall. He had invited the woman who'd left him out in the freezing cold, discarded him without a second thought, and now, after decades of devotion, I was merely the janitor, someone to be hidden away like dirt swept under a rug. As I walked slowly away from the doorstep, each step heavier than the last, I could feel something shifting within me. The pain was raw, but alongside it emerged a quiet clarity. I had spent my entire life making Lucas my purpose, forgetting completely who Julia Evans really was. That evening, as I sat alone in my small apartment, staring blankly at the unfinished painting on the easel I'd abandoned years ago, the realization hit me with brutal honesty. I had lost myself long ago, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a shadow defined solely by Lucas's needs. Yet beneath the hurt lay something powerful, an ember, a dignity flickering quietly, refusing to be extinguished. Maybe it was time I remembered what true love really meant, and it had to start with loving myself enough not to accept such cruelty any longer. As I reached for my phone, my hands steadier than they'd been in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Lucas had chosen to build his future upon a lie, upon the betrayal of the very person who had once been his entire world. Now, it was my turn to rewrite the story, and this time, I wouldn't be the one left behind. Raising Lucas alone was never easy, but life taught me early on that strength often arrives quietly, wrapped within hardship and patience. The first few years passed in a whirlwind of late nights, early mornings, and endless shifts scrubbing hallways until the polished linoleum reflected my weary reflection back at me. But every ache, every blister, every moment of exhaustion felt insignificant compared to the gentle warmth of Lucas curled against me, breathing softly, safe and sound. I still remember the sleepless night before Lucas's first day at kindergarten. After finally putting him to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, carefully patching together an old backpack someone had discarded. My fingers moved slowly, guided by dim lamplight and aching determination. "Julia," I whispered softly to myself, smiling despite tired eyes, one stitch at a time. Each careful stitch represented a silent promise that Lucas would always feel proud, never ashamed, even if the bag was secondhand. In the mornings, Lucas and I walked hand in hand to school, our footsteps crunching gently over crisp autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalks. He was always full of questions, his curious eyes wide with wonder. "Mom, do trees get cold when they lose their leaves?" Lucas asked one morning, tugging on my sleeve gently, as we passed beneath the nearly bare branches of an old maple. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Maybe a little, sweetheart, but losing leaves is just their way of letting go, making room for new beginnings." I carried those words quietly within myself for many years afterward, unaware then how deeply I'd need to hold on to them later. As Lucas grew, his needs changed and my responsibilities multiplied. I often woke long before dawn, scrubbing bathrooms and classrooms, the sharp scent of cleaning chemicals stinging my nose, marking my fingertips with cracks and dryness. My coworkers often asked me why I didn't rest more or take fewer shifts. But how could I explain the relentless, protective love that pushed me forward? The need to ensure Lucas never felt poverty's cold sting, never went hungry or felt ashamed at school, and so, instead, I just smiled faintly and replied softly, "He deserves better." And Lucas thrived, My boy blossomed into a teenager with charm and ambition, a radiant smile that drew people effortlessly toward him. But beneath his success lay quiet sacrifices that I rarely allowed him to see. I skipped dinners, carefully counting pennies so I could secretly buy him the trendy shoes his friends wore. Late at night, alone, my stomach rumbling in protest, I'd smile tiredly, picturing his joy when opening each carefully wrapped box. When Lucas turned 16, I bought him his first car, a second-hand Toyota, faded blue paint and rusty edges, yet solid and reliable. I can still recall the bright, excited disbelief on his face, his voice cracking as he exclaimed, "Mom, how did you do this? This is amazing." "You're worth it," I said softly, fighting back tears. I held on to that brief embrace, his arms squeezing tightly around me, unaware of how rare and precious those moments would soon become. College brought new challenges, tuition payments looming larger than anything I'd faced before. So I began cleaning houses on weekends, quietly swallowing my pride, wiping dust from expensive furniture owned by people who barely acknowledged my presence. Lucas never saw my weary face as I returned home at midnight, feet swollen, back aching, too tired to even undress properly before falling into bed. Yet every sacrifice felt justified whenever Lucas called from campus, his voice brimming with youthful excitement about his latest achievements, good grades, honors awards, internships. I carefully kept each accomplishment pinned neatly to the wall above my kitchen table, silent tokens of pride overshadowing my exhaustion. His dreams had become mine too. Years later, when Lucas landed his first job and bought his own small house in an upscale suburb, pride swelled in my chest, mingled with relief. I helped him unpack boxes, carefully placing expensive china and gleaming silverware into cabinets, marveling silently at a lifestyle far removed from my humble existence. "Mom," Lucas had said gently that day, his voice unusually hesitant, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done. I wouldn't be here without you." I smiled warmly, eyes glistening softly with tears as I quickly blinked away. "I always knew you'd have a better life than I ever could. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Yet that gentle exchange became bittersweet in hindsight. The sincerity I'd once felt now cast into shadow by the truth that was slowly unraveling beneath the surface. The years moved steadily, the house I helped him purchase now adorned with tasteful decor, sophisticated artwork, and elegant furniture reflecting a social status Lucas seemed increasingly determined to maintain. I rarely saw my son as often as before, our conversations fewer, shorter. Excuses about busy schedules and new social obligations began filling our phone calls, creating distance I couldn't bridge. Still, my heart stubbornly clung to hope, certain the love that had bound us together for decades remained unbreakable. With his wedding approaching, I naively believed the bond we once shared would reconnect, that he would proudly introduce me to his bride-to-be, standing tall beside me, finally acknowledging our shared journey. But life, as always, had a different plan, preparing to deliver a cruel awakening I never saw coming. As Lucas's wedding day drew nearer, I found myself standing at the edge of his life, desperately hoping for an invitation to step closer. I saw less and less of him, and our conversations, once filled with warmth, now felt hollow, carefully polite, stripped of the genuine affection I had grown to cherish. One evening, after a particularly exhausting shift at school, I noticed I'd missed a call from Lucas. My heart quickened, eager for the familiar warmth of his voice. With tired eyes and a hopeful smile, I dialed him back, but the phone rang unanswered, slipping quietly to voicemail. Sighing softly, I laid down my phone, telling myself he must have been busy. But something, a quiet, unsettling instinct, compelled me to try again later that night. It was past midnight when I finally dialed again, standing in my tiny kitchen, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. This time Lucas answered quickly, but before I could speak, his laughter spilled through the speaker, mingled with the distant voices of his friends. "You're seriously not inviting your mom to the wedding?" one of his friends asked in disbelief. A short pause, then Lucas's voice, sharp, dismissive, responded with chilling clarity. "You mean the janitor? Come on, man. How embarrassing would that be? Imagine introducing her to Amelia's family." My chest tightened sharply, breath catching painfully in my throat. My fingers gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned pale, the world around me spinning. It felt as though the ground had suddenly dropped away beneath me, leaving me suspended in empty darkness. Besides, Lucas continued, oblivious to my silent presence, I found my real mom. She fits in better, she's educated, classy, someone respectable to show off. Amelia's family will love her. Real mom. Those two words struck deep, twisting painfully inside my heart. My vision blurred, knees weakening beneath the brutal weight of betrayal. With shaking fingers, I ended the call quietly, collapsing into the worn kitchen chair as hot tears finally spilled silently down my cheeks. I spent that night sitting motionless in the dark, replaying every word over and over again. How had this happened? How could the child I'd devoted my life to, the one I'd nurtured, supported, loved without reservation, now see me as merely an embarrassment, someone to be hidden away? Days later, still burdened by unspoken grief, I drove to Lucas's home, determined to face him. Parking across the street, I hesitated, heart pounding loudly in my chest as I watched him through the window, happily chatting with his fiancée. Mustering all the courage I possessed, I finally stepped forward, knocking gently on the door. Lucas opened it, eyes widening slightly as he registered my presence, quickly glancing nervously behind him. "Mom," he said, forcing a weak smile. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," I replied softly, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I heard something, Lucas, and I have to understand." He stepped quickly outside, pulling the door shut behind him, his tone sharper, impatient. "This isn't a good time. Amelia's parents are inside." "Lucas," I whispered, feeling tears welling up, despite my determination not to cry. "Why are you hiding me from them? I heard what you said. Am I really just an embarrassment to you?" He shifted awkwardly, unable to meet my eyes directly. "Mom, you have to understand. Amelia's family, they're important, they're influential. How can I tell them that my mother cleans floors for a living? It's just not respectable." Each word pierced me deeper, but I held myself steady, dignity quietly anchoring me despite the pain. "And your real mom, Lucas, the one who left you in the cold, she's respectable now?" He winced, irritation flickering across his face. "She made mistakes, sure, but she's changed. At least I can introduce her without feeling ashamed." The cold bluntness of his words finally broke something within me, yet I didn't crumble. Instead, clarity washed over me, sharp and illuminating. I took a deep breath, slowly stepping back. "I spent my entire life making sure you'd never know shame or rejection," I said softly, evenly, my voice shaking only slightly. But now I realized that wasn't enough. He stared at me, confusion mingling with irritation. "What do you mean?" I said, lifting my head, feeling strength return quietly to my bones. "I made the mistake of teaching you that love meant giving everything without asking anything back, not even respect. But maybe it's time we both learned differently." Turning, I walked away without another word, Lucas's stunned silence trailing behind me. The evening air felt colder now, but for the first time in years, I could breathe clearly. I didn't know yet what would come next, only that something had shifted irrevocably inside me. Lucas had chosen his path, one that no longer included me. Now it was my turn to discover who Julia Evans was beyond motherhood, beyond sacrifice. It was time to reclaim myself. The day after my confrontation with Lucas passed in a quiet haze. My body moved automatically through the motions of daily life, but inside, I felt disconnected, as if I were watching myself from afar. Yet beneath the numbness, a quiet resolve slowly began to form, stubborn and determined. A few days later, I found myself at work, scrubbing vigorously at a stubborn stain in the hallway at Lincoln Elementary, my muscles aching. I hadn't slept properly since the argument with Lucas, my mind replaying his harsh words endlessly. As I leaned forward, the bucket slipped suddenly from my fingers, spilling soapy water across the polished floor. "Julia, are you all right?" a gentle voice asked from behind. I turned slowly, seeing Margaret, my colleague of 20 years, watching me with quiet concern. Her gray hair framed her face gently, eyes filled with worry. I'm fine," I murmured softly, trying to hide my trembling hands. "You don't seem fine," Margaret whispered softly, kneeling beside me to help mop up the spilled water. "You can talk to me." For a moment, I hesitated, but then, feeling the pressure of silence too heavy to carry alone, I sighed deeply. "Lucas, he doesn't want me at his wedding," I finally admitted quietly, unable to meet her gaze. "He invited his biological mother instead, the woman who abandoned him." Margaret's eyes widened, shock quickly turning to quiet sorrow. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on mine. "Julia, I'm so sorry." I shook my head gently, trying to swallow the lump forming painfully in my throat. "All these years, everything I gave, every sacrifice, I never asked for anything in return, Margaret. But respect, I thought I'd at least earned that." Her hand tightened around mine reassuringly. "You've given him everything, Julia. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, people choose their own paths and their choices don't always reflect our worth." I nodded slowly, absorbing her words, feeling both comforted and heartbroken. As I stood to gather my things, my vision blurred momentarily, dizziness suddenly washing over me. I steadied myself against the wall, breathing shallowly. "Julia?" Margaret's voice echoed anxiously. Before I could respond, darkness gently enveloped me. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a hospital bed, the steady beeping of monitors filling the silence. My head throbbed gently and my wrist felt oddly heavy, wrapped tightly in bandages. Margaret sat beside me, eyes filled with worry. "You took a nasty fall," she explained softly. "You fainted and hit your head. The doctor said it's exhaustion and stress." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. Stress. The irony almost made me laugh bitterly. After decades of pushing through exhaustion, my body had finally said enough. And in the quiet of that sterile hospital room, with tubes and wires connecting me to machines, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth through sacrifice, believing that giving everything away was the only way to deserve love. Yet lying there, vulnerable and alone, I realized that the one person I had forgotten to love was myself. That afternoon, as sunlight gently filtered through the hospital blinds, the door opened and, to my shock, Lucas stepped hesitantly inside. He looked uncomfortable, eyes briefly taking in my weakened form, expression guarded. "Margaret called me," he muttered awkwardly. "Said you were hurt." "I'm fine," I answered softly, carefully sitting up despite the dull ache in my wrist. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, eyes avoiding mine. "Look, Mom," he began cautiously, "I didn't want things to end up like this, but you need to understand. Amelia's family, they're sophisticated people. I'm trying to fit into their world." I studied him quietly, sadness weighing heavily in my chest. "And fitting in means pretending I don't exist?" He looked away, frustrated. "Why can't you understand? It's not personal, it's just how the world works." "Lucas," I whispered softly, my voice firm yet filled with sorrow. "Everything is personal. Every choice we make shows exactly who we are." He shook his head stubbornly. "I'm sorry, but I've made my decision. It's my wedding, and I can't let you ruin this for me." His words struck me sharply, yet something inside me hardened rather than shattered. "You think having me at your wedding would ruin it?" I asked quietly. He hesitated briefly, eyes finally meeting mine with a cold certainty that sent a chill through me. "Yes." That single word cut deeper than anything else, confirming what I'd feared most. Yet somehow, amid the pain, a sense of peace flooded me. Lucas had made his choice, one that showed clearly who he'd become, and now I would make mine. As he turned to leave, I called softly after him, my voice steady, filled with quiet dignity. "Lucas, someday you'll realize respect isn't earned through appearances or status. It's earned through how you treat the people who've loved you most." He paused momentarily in the doorway, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, but then he stepped out without another word, leaving me alone once again. Lying quietly, I stared thoughtfully at the ceiling. Lucas had given me a strange gift: clarity. His rejection, brutal as it was, had forced me to face myself clearly for the first time in decades. I had built my life around Lucas, sacrificing dreams, comfort, dignity, all for him. Yet the love I'd given so freely had never truly been returned. I had thought my value depended solely upon how much I gave, how much I endured. But I was wrong. Slowly, a new resolve formed quietly inside me, fragile yet growing stronger with each heartbeat. Perhaps Lucas didn't understand yet, but I finally did. Real love, true dignity, and genuine respect had to begin with me. It was finally time I learned to honor myself. The days following Lucas's visit passed quietly in the solitude of the hospital. In those long, silent hours, my mind wandered through fragments of the past, re-examining every choice I'd ever made, every sacrifice given freely, every ounce of myself I'd poured into the dream of his future. My wrist healed quickly, but something deeper within me needed more than medical attention. It needed healing from within. After being discharged, I returned home to an apartment that felt emptier than ever before. The walls, once vibrant with Lucas's childhood drawings and proudly displayed photographs, now seemed faded, echoing memories I'd treasured for decades. As I moved through the quiet rooms, my gaze fell upon the half-finished painting I'd abandoned years ago, still leaning against the dusty easel near the living room window. It stood like a silent monument to dreams left unfulfilled. Slowly, I picked up the paintbrush, feeling its familiar weight settle into my palm. An old friend I'd almost forgotten. Brushing dust from the canvas, I paused, my fingertips tracing the faded outlines I had once sketched with such care. "You used to dream bigger than this, Julia," I whispered softly to myself, a small, bittersweet smile playing at my lips. As I began to paint again, strokes gentle and hesitant at first, memories rose vividly within me, moments of quiet joy and heartbreaking sadness. Painting had always been more than art. It was my refuge, a place to reflect without judgment, to express what words could never capture fully. One afternoon, as I stood quietly painting by the window, a gentle knock startled me from my thoughts. Opening the door, I saw Margaret standing there holding a small warm casserole in her hands, eyes kind and filled with concern. "I thought you might like some company," she said softly, stepping inside and setting the dish carefully on the table, "and perhaps some homemade comfort." We sat together quietly, eating slowly in comfortable silence before Margaret finally spoke. "How are you really doing, Julia?" I looked down, my fingers tracing softly along the edge of the table. I think I'm finally beginning to understand myself again." She nodded gently, eyes thoughtful. "I've watched you give so much for so long, Julia, and it's beautiful, that love and sacrifice, but you deserve to receive something in return too. You deserve to be loved as deeply as you've loved others." Her words settled warmly inside me, touching something I'd ignored for far too long. "I don't know if I even remember how to begin," I admitted softly. "It feels selfish to put myself first after all these years." Margaret reached over, squeezing my hand firmly. "There's nothing selfish about remembering you matter too. You've been holding your breath all this time, Julia. It's time to exhale." That night, long after Margaret left, I lay awake, pondering her words carefully. She was right. I had spent decades defining myself solely by how much I gave to others, as if my worth depended entirely on sacrifice and selflessness. Yet love and respect didn't require that I erase myself completely. Perhaps I'd misunderstood love all along. In the days that followed, I began reclaiming small pieces of my life, deliberately and purposefully. I woke early, not to scrub floors, but to paint in the gentle morning light, sipping tea slowly, savoring the quiet peace of solitude. I took walks, allowing myself to simply enjoy the world around me, the bright laughter of children playing in the park, the warmth of sunshine on my skin, the delicate fragrance of blooming flowers. With each passing day, the weight of resentment toward Lucas gradually lifted, replaced by a quiet, calm acceptance. I saw clearly now that Lucas's choices were his own, painful as they were, and not a reflection of my value. His rejection didn't define me unless I allowed it to. One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings, I stumbled across a box of Lucas's childhood keepsakes, small toys, handwritten notes, and faded photographs. Holding a small note he'd written in second grade, I felt tears welling gently in my eyes. In his childish handwriting, he had written simply, "Mom, you're my hero." A bittersweet smile played softly across my lips. Yes, perhaps once I had been Lucas's hero, but now I needed to become my own. As the wedding date drew nearer, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Whispers of Lucas's grand event drifting through conversations at the grocery store, coffee shop, and even in the school hallways where I still cleaned quietly. But the sting had dulled now. Each mention of Lucas no longer felt like a dagger twisting painfully inside my heart. Instead, it reminded me gently of the new path unfolding quietly ahead, one free of bitterness, defined by dignity and quiet strength. Then one evening, as I quietly sipped tea on my balcony, the phone rang, jolting me softly from my thoughts. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen, and hesitantly I answered. "Julia Evans?" asked a gentle voice on the other end. "You don't know me, but my name is Amelia Lucas's fiancé. I was hoping we could talk." My heart quickened slightly, curiosity mixed with quiet apprehension. "Of course," I replied softly, my voice calm despite the rush of questions flooding my mind. "What's this about?" There was a pause, and when Amelia spoke again, her voice trembled softly. "I need to know the truth, Julia. Lucas told us a story, one I've believed without question until recently, but something isn't adding up." Taking a deep, calming breath, I nodded slowly to myself. "Then perhaps it's time you heard the full story," I said quietly, knowing exactly what I needed to do next. Because the truth, though painful, held within it the power to finally set us both free. After Amelia's unexpected call, we agreed to meet at a quiet cafe just outside town. The small establishment was cozy, decorated warmly with soft lights and the faint aroma of fresh-baked pastries. I arrived early, nerves fluttering softly inside my chest. I chose a table near the window, sipping tea slowly, trying to calm the quiet storm of anticipation. When Amelia entered, she was immediately recognizable, elegant, poised, with gentle, thoughtful eyes that scanned the room until they found mine. As she approached, I stood, exchanging a polite handshake before we both sat down. Her gaze was careful, searching my face for clues before she finally spoke. "Thank you for meeting me, Julia," she began softly, a touch of nervousness beneath her composed demeanor. "Lucas has always said you abandoned him, that you were absent, distant, never interested in his life. But I recently learned something that doesn't quite fit." I felt my heart tighten briefly at Lucas's lies, but kept my voice gentle and steady. "I never abandoned Lucas. I've loved him with every part of my being since the night I found him on those icy steps." Amelia's eyes widened slightly, surprise mingling with curiosity. "Found him? Lucas told me you were his biological mother, that you'd left him, and now wanted back into his life after he became successful?" I smiled softly, sadness threaded deeply into my words. "That's exactly what his real mother did. She abandoned Lucas shortly after his birth. I was a janitor at Lincoln Elementary when I found him abandoned outside, freezing and helpless. I raised him as my own, Amelia, every scar on my hands, every line on my face, there from loving him." She stared at me silently, absorbing the truth with a quiet intensity. "Then why would Lucas lie?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of the answer heavily on my chest. "He wanted to fit into your world. Amelia, a world he thinks wouldn't accept a woman who cleans floors for a living. He's ashamed of me, embarrassed by my job and my simple life." Her face paled slightly, pain flashing briefly in her eyes. "That's not who I thought Lucas was." "Sometimes, Amelia," I said gently, leaning forward slightly, "people show us only what they want us to see, but the truth always finds a way out eventually." We sat quietly for several moments, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Amelia spoke again, determination in her voice. "Can you prove this? Not because I doubt you, but because my parents, they believe Lucas wholeheartedly." I nodded slowly, feeling an unexpected surge of quiet strength. "I never thought I'd need proof of my own life, but yes, I can." Over the next days, I quietly began gathering evidence. I retrieved carefully preserved documents, adoption papers from decades past, childhood photographs capturing birthdays, holidays, and quiet, loving moments between Lucas and myself. Each item carefully chosen to illustrate a truth Lucas had worked so hard to hide. One evening, while sorting through old paperwork, I found a small recorder tucked away in a drawer. Memories returned vividly, the nights Lucas and I spent recording silly songs and bedtime stories when he was a child. As I listened to the tapes, tears welled gently, hearing his childish voice filled with warmth, calling me Mom, giggling happily, completely unaware of the future rift. But among these memories was something else, accidental evidence I'd forgotten existed. There, preserved on a tape from Lucas's college years, was a voicemail he'd left in a drunken stupor after a party, angrily complaining about my job, calling me just a janitor to a friend, his voice harsh, disdainful. I'd erased that night from memory, believing it to be youthful indiscretion. Now it felt like a painful yet necessary confirmation. Days later, Margaret joined me as I quietly assembled these pieces of my past into a cohesive narrative. She watched thoughtfully, sadness mingled with admiration in her eyes. "Julia," she whispered softly, "are you sure you want to do this? Lucas made his choices, but exposing him publicly, it might cause him to lose everything." I paused, fingertips gently brushing the edge of a photograph. "Margaret, I'm not doing this out of revenge or bitterness. This isn't about causing him pain. It's about reclaiming my truth, about no longer allowing my dignity to be erased by someone else's shame." Margaret smiled softly, squeezing my shoulder reassuringly. "You've always had dignity, Julia. Now you're just showing the world that it's always been yours." That night, after Margaret left, I sat alone quietly, the room softly lit by a single lamp. My heart felt heavy yet steady. I wasn't driven by anger or resentment. Instead, I felt strangely calm, clear-headed. The truth, though painful, offered a quiet liberation. As the wedding approached, Amelia kept in contact discreetly, struggling internally with the revelation of Lucas's betrayal. She assured me that on the wedding day, I'd have the chance to tell my side of the story, to let everyone see clearly who Lucas had become. In the solitude of my home, I prepared carefully, not just papers and recordings, but myself emotionally, spiritually, for what would inevitably be one of the most difficult days of my life. Yet beneath the quiet apprehension was something else, a growing sense of peace, strength, and gentle courage I'd never fully acknowledged before. Because the truth wasn't about vengeance or punishment, it was about healing, about stepping finally into a light that had always been mine, but had remained hidden for far too long. And soon, the world, Lucas's world, would see clearly that Julia Evans wasn't defined by the hands that cleaned floors, but by the heart that had loved unconditionally, bravely, and silently for decades. A week before the wedding, I made a quiet decision, one that had been slowly taking shape in the back of my mind since Amelia's call. I needed to confront the one shadow that had hovered over Lucas's story for decades, his birth mother. It wasn't out of bitterness or jealousy. It wasn't even about comparing sacrifices. It was about understanding how Lucas had come to believe that the woman who left him behind deserved a seat at his wedding more than the one who had raised him. I needed to see her not as a ghost of the past, but as a woman made of flesh, flaws, and choices. Her name was Valerie Quinn. I remembered it from the birth records I had signed all those years ago when formalizing the adoption. A quick online search led me to a real estate office on the north side of town. She'd reinvented herself as a property consultant, specializing in high-end homes. According to the website, there was even a professional headshot, carefully styled hair, pristine makeup, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I called the office, asked to set up an appointment regarding a potential listing. When I arrived that Thursday afternoon, the receptionist waved me toward a glass-walled conference room. Valerie entered moments later, her heels tapping a rhythmic beat across the tiled floor. She didn't recognize me, of course she wouldn't. To her, I had been nothing more than the invisible figure who picked up what she left behind. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly, extending a manicured hand. "Valerie Quinn." I stood slowly, accepting her handshake. Julia Evans. The smile on her face froze ever so slightly. Her eyes narrowed with recognition, then quickly recovered behind a practiced mask. "Ah," she said, voice carefully neutral. "I see." I nodded once. "I thought it was time we had a conversation, woman to woman." She took a slow seat across from me, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. I suppose that depends on the topic. I leaned forward slightly. Lucas. Her lips tightened into a faint, unreadable line. What about him? I raised him, I said evenly. I gave him everything I had 30 years of my life. You were gone, you walked away. For a moment, her eyes flickered, not with guilt, but discomfort. I was 17, she said coldly. I had nothing, no money, no future, and no support. I didn't flinch. And yet now you do. She gave a small, defensive shrug. Life turned around eventually. I let silence stretch between us, refusing to fill it with blame. So why come back now? Why accept his invitation? Her answer came quickly, too quickly. He reached out to me, said he wanted to reconnect, to build something real with his biological mother. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. And you saw an opportunity. She blinked, offended. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said calmly, that while I was working double shifts to pay for his school and food, you were building a life elsewhere. And now, when he has a prestigious job, a beautiful fiancé, and a wealthy future in sight, you show up. Convenient timing, don't you think? Valerie's mask cracked then, her voice sharp. You think I came back for money? I don't think, I said softly. I see a woman who's decided to rewrite her role in someone else's life story, and I won't stop you, but you and I both know the truth, and sooner or later he will too. We sat in tense silence. Then Valerie stood abruptly, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. Well, she said, tone clipped, this has been, enlightening. I stood too. If Lucas chooses to believe your story, that's his right. But don't mistake silence for weakness, Ms. Quinn. I stayed quiet out of love, but I won't stay quiet out of shame. She met my gaze for a final second, hers uncertain, mine unshaken, then turned and walked out without another word. Later that night, I sat by the window, the sky outside dark and cloudless. In my lap lay an old photograph Lucas, at age 6, holding up a finger painting he'd proudly made. I remembered the moment so vividly, how he'd run up to me, smiling, yelling, I made it for you, Mom. A tear slipped down my cheek, not out of grief, but acceptance. I had given him a childhood filled with warmth and love. Nothing could erase that, not Valerie, not even Lucas. Confronting her hadn't changed what was coming, but it had brought something essential back to me, my voice, and I intended to use it because there are moments in life when silence is grace, and others when silence is betrayal. The wedding day was approaching, and I was done being silent. The morning of Lucas's wedding dawned bright and golden, the kind of clear-skied day that people believed promised good omens. The venue was a sprawling vineyard estate just outside Boston Grand, elegant, meticulously decorated in white and gold, every detail screaming aspiration and status. I arrived quietly, alone, dressed in a simple navy dress and a gray shawl, nothing extravagant but dignified. I carried a leather folder tucked neatly beneath my arm, and though my hands trembled slightly, my spine stood straight. I wasn't here to beg, I was here to reveal. Amelia had arranged everything. She met me at the side entrance of the venue, her eyes solemn but resolute. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked, voice soft. I nodded. The truth deserves a voice, even if it shakes. Amelia exhaled, then led me discreetly through the back hallway into a small private room adjacent to the reception hall. It'll happen during the toasts. My father will introduce the speakers. Lucas will expect a speech from me. Instead, it'll be yours. I looked at her, moved not just by her courage, but by her willingness to confront the lie she had nearly built a future on. Thank you, Amelia. No matter what happens today, thank you for choosing honesty. She gave a faint smile. Everyone deserves to know who they're really applauding. The ceremony passed as expected, vows exchanged, applause, kisses, champagne flutes raised beneath twinkling chandeliers. I watched from behind the curtains, unseen, as Lucas laughed confidently with guests, his arm around Valerie, who wore a silver gown and a smile that seemed pasted on with precision. When the reception began and the music faded to quiet, Amelia's father took the mic and clinked his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed cheerfully, what a beautiful day for a beautiful couple. And now, to say a few words, someone very special to the bride and groom. Lucas beamed, already half rising, expecting to walk to the stage. Please welcome Julia Evans. The moment was electric. Lucas froze, confusion flickering into panic. Valerie's head turned sharply, her expression tightening, and I stepped forward. There was a brief murmur in the crowd as I walked up to the platform, and an older woman, clearly not part of the picture-perfect tableau they'd carefully crafted. I took the mic. For a moment, I stood in silence, scanning the room. My eyes didn't linger on Lucas. I was speaking to everyone else. My name is Julia Evans, I began, voice calm but unwavering. Some of you may not know me, but I have known Lucas since he was a newborn left in the cold, alone and abandoned on the steps of Lincoln Elementary. I found him, I took him in, and for 30 years I raised him, not out of obligation, but out of love. Gasps echoed through the room. I scrubbed floors so he could go to school, skipped meals so he'd have enough to eat. I worked night shifts so he could wear the same clothes as his classmates. I bought his first car, paid for his tuition, watched him grow into the man you see today. I paused, letting the silence settle, heavy and still. But recently I was told by that same man that I was just a janitor, that my presence would embarrass him, that I didn't belong at his wedding. I turned then, facing Lucas directly. His face was pale, lips slightly parted, stunned into silence. I was asked to stay quiet, to disappear, to make room for someone more acceptable. I held up the folder and opened it gently. These are adoption papers with my name, medical records, birthday photos, recordings of a little boy calling me Mom. And this, I pressed a small button on the speaker Amelia had placed on the podium, is Lucas at 22 telling a friend I'm just a janitor he has to tolerate. His voice crackled through the speakers, unmistakable. His words, slurred, cruel, laced with scorn. She scrubs toilets, man. I mean, I'm grateful, sure, but I can't have people thinking that's where I come from. The room went still, not a breath, not a whisper, just the sound of glass being quietly set down. Amelia stood slowly. She didn't look at Lucas. She looked at me, and she nodded. Then she walked out of the room. Lucas stood abruptly, stumbling forward. Wait, Amelia, this isn't, it's taken out of context. But no one moved, no one followed him, no one defended him. I stepped down from the stage, calm and steady. As I passed Lucas, I paused. He looked at me with desperation, confusion, maybe even a flicker of shame. But I didn't speak. I had said everything that needed to be said. And sometimes dignity is choosing to leave the last word unspoken. As I exited into the crisp afternoon light, a strange peace settled over me. I hadn't come to destroy, I had come to reveal, and sometimes when truth walks quietly through the door, pretense falls apart on its own. Lucas stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, eyes darting wildly, as if searching for someone, anyone to save him. But no one moved, no one applauded. The silence was louder than any shout. "Please," he called after Amelia, who was already halfway to the exit. "Wait, it's not like that. You don't understand?" But she didn't turn back. His voice cracked as he tried to explain to the guests. "It was taken out of context. I was young drunk. It doesn't mean anything now." Still, no one stepped forward. They just watched, some with pity, others with quiet disgust. His carefully crafted image, successful, sophisticated, respectable, was unraveling right there on the parquet floor, under a chandelier that no longer felt like it belonged to him. Valerie, standing a few steps behind him, looked more annoyed than ashamed. She didn't speak, she didn't defend him, she just turned and slipped away into the crowd. Alone now, Lucas's shoulders slumped, his confidence drained. He stared down at the polished floor where just hours ago he'd imagined his perfect new beginning. Now, it was just shards of truth, of pride, of relationships he'd believed unshakable. He had lost his bride, his standing, his mask, and maybe, just maybe, he realized in that moment that the greatest loss wasn't what had just walked away, but what he had cast aside long ago, in a quiet apartment above a bakery, where love had once asked for nothing but to be seen. And now it was too late. 1 month after the wedding, I sat beneath the soft morning sun in my tiny apartment. Now, filled with warmth and silence, not emptiness but peace. The walls, once lined with Lucas's childhood memories, now held something different, my own paintings. Colors I hadn't touched in decades bloomed again, not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but simply because they made me feel alive. With Amelia's encouragement, I'd used part of my savings to open a small studio on the edge of town. Not fancy, just honest, a place where single mothers could bring their kids, learn basic skills, share stories, and reclaim pieces of themselves the world had overlooked. I called it the Second Light Foundation because sometimes we don't get to choose our first chapter, but we can write our second. I didn't hear from Lucas, not a call, not a letter, and strangely, I no longer waited for one. Forgiveness, I'd come to understand, didn't always need a reunion. Sometimes it was just the quiet decision to stop carrying someone else's shame. As I stood in my studio that afternoon watching a young mother smile as her daughter traced her tiny fingers in paint, I felt something I hadn't in years, joy that belonged only to me. I had spent a lifetime giving love. Now finally, I was learning to receive it from within, from the world, from women who saw me not as a janitor or a mistake to be hidden, but as a survivor, a builder, an artist, a mother, and maybe, for the first time in my life, a whole woman. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.